Hey everybody, this is Christian and today we're talking once more about container management. If you're following my channel, you know that I've already tried out many different tools to manage Docker or Kubernetes workloads in my HomeLab. We've covered some cool web UIs like Portainer and Rancher, CLI tools like Docker Compose, kubectl, and even some weird ones like K9s. But one thing that I haven't shown you yet is how I'm actually managing my containers in VSCode. And let me tell you this one thing, if you want to have a simple and comfortable way to manage workloads and resources in a HomeLab, I think VSCode is probably the best tool you can use for that, at least for me. It's my absolute favorite. And in today's video, I'll show you exactly why and which plugins you need to install to make VSCode the best container management tool out there. So let's have a look. But before we start with container management, we need to talk about container security. And I'd like to show you a new amazing tool that is created by the makers of Kubescape. And this is called Armo. Thanks Armo, by the way, for supporting this video. Armo lets you scan your entire Kubernetes cluster against common vulnerabilities and compliance policies, showing you all the problems and issues you got in a nice and clean web UI. For example, if you got an issue with configuration settings, it shows you all the affected namespaces and objects, the severity, remediation tactics, and it gives you a smart recommendation on how to exactly fix them in your manifest. That is really useful. And for vulnerabilities, it also shows you whether they are fixed in a specific version and what you need to upgrade to. What is extremely useful in Armo, because most of these tools, they produce a hell lot of noise. Yeah, even for small demo Kubernetes clusters, you will likely have hundreds or thousands of different theoretical findings. But how do you quickly find out what needs your attention? In the Armo attack path tools, you can very easily find out what services are actually accessible from the public internet, what's the connection path, and does the object at the end have problems that could potentially be exploited? This is what you need to carefully look at first, and I love that Armo spends a lot of effort on visualizing or highlighting these important things beyond all the noise that container orchestration just creates. It's really a great tool. Just a quick look at the pricing. It's entirely free for one cluster up to 10 worker nodes, so feel free to use it in your HomeLab. Try it out. I'll leave you a link in the description down below. Some of you might wonder, why did I even consider switching my container management platform to a code editor while we have all these amazing container management tools out there like Portainer, Rancher, Argo CD, kubectl, Docker Compose. I could name so many other great tools that are solely created for container management or container orchestration. But that's the whole point, yeah? Because in IT, we often are too heavily focused on all these different tools than on the stuff that actually matters. And I realized that I spent most of my time fiddling around with these different tools, understanding the specific requirements, limitations, and workflows that you need to familiarize yourself with. And instead, I could actually have invested that time much better when just deploying this stuff easy and simple. Sometimes less is more. And that is why I decided to drastically reduce the number of tools that I'm using in my own container workflows and processes. Of course, I'm still testing and trying out many tools, but I'm very carefully choosing which ones I'm using myself. And what I found out is that VSCode is a pretty great container management platform for me. If you install the right extensions and plugins, I can literally do like 90% of all of the stuff that I have to do in my HomeLab with just one single tool, that is VSCode. And it also has some really great advantages over those big and beefy container management platforms because it has a really light footprint. Yeah, everything is just running locally. You don't need to install anything on your Docker server or on your container orchestration. You just run VSCode on your local workstation, and from there you can create and manage all the different resources like Docker Compose files or Kubernetes manifests, but you could also use the same tool for deploying them. So as a conclusion, VSCode is a pretty great tool for managing container workflows. But let me give you a deep dive about this and let's talk about the right extensions, what you need to install, and how I'm actually using VSCode to manage my container workflows. Let's have a look. So first of all, for those of you who have never worked with VSCode before and don't know what I'm actually talking about, I hope that aren't too many of you, because you probably have seen VSCode in most of my tutorials whenever I was editing any template files, code, or deployment stuff, because VSCode is a really great source code editor. It's probably the most beloved tool by software developers and professional IT guys. And it's free, it's built on open source software, and it just runs everywhere, so you can easily install that on macOS, Windows, and Linux. And you can also enhance this with third-party plugins to extend the functionality. So once you've installed that, you can click on extensions here, search in the marketplace, and you can do some really great stuff with it. I once did a video on some of the best VS Code extensions that I'm using, so I will link you that in the description. You can still watch it. There's some great stuff in here. But today we're mostly focusing on how to extend VS Code to make it a container management platform. And the first extension I want to show you, or it's actually a collection of 3 different extensions, that is called Remote SSH. So you can install that along with those 2 other extensions, Remote SSH for editing configuration files and the Remote Explorer, because that allows you to easily open an SSH connection to any remote machine and use VS Code just like you would edit it on that remote machine. It's pretty cool. And that is also an extension that you are going to need if you want to manage containers on remote servers. So like in a HomeLab, we're often deploying virtual Linux machines or servers where we are managing Docker containers or running Kubernetes clusters and so forth. So that's why remote SSH, you're going to need that a lot to upload any files to those remote servers, but you can also use it to manage containers on those remote servers. So that's a pretty useful extension that I'm using so many times in my projects. Once you've installed that, you will see a window that is called Remote Explorer. So you can easily click on that. And as you can see, I've got a list with all my remote servers in here. So those entries are usually coming from the SSH configuration file. So if you've opened that file, you can configure those remote entries in this text file here. You just type in host and then the IP address or the fully qualified DNS name of your server. You can even specify user and some other options like a specific private SSH key pair that you always want to use when you're connecting to that remote server and so on. That's of course also the same progress as you would use in a terminal when you want to connect to a remote SSH machine. But once you collect those entries to all your remote servers in this .ssh config file, they will show up in this Remote Explorer window. And you can easily just select one of these entries here and open a new window to connect to this remote server, either in that same window or you can open a new window. So let me just demonstrate this when I open a connection to my production server here. So you can see you need to authorize with an SSH key, and then it's automatically opening a terminal on that remote machine. And yeah, you can just type in the terminal commands. You can now see which containers you have deployed currently. You can see there are a couple of containers that are up and running. And what is also great, you can open a folder, and that is then opening a folder on your remote server, not on your local workstation. And this is how I'm basically editing all my Docker Compose files on the remote server. Like I'm managing those projects in folders in my personal home directory. For example, let's open this project here, Traffic Production 4. So this is my reverse proxy. That is a Docker Compose project. You can see in this folder, I have the docker compose.yaml file, and I can directly edit this file here, make changes if I want to update that on my remote servers. And then I can easily just manage the entire Docker Compose project in VS Code. That's pretty cool. The next extension that you're going to need to manage containers in VS Code is obviously the Docker extension. So that will enhance VS Code with many features like build containers, manage containers, and even deploy the whole environment. So that is really great. Once you install that, you will get a new icon in this window here. When you click on that, you can see there you can do all sorts of container management tasks. Yeah, you can see all the running containers. You can see all the images that you have downloaded. You can even connect registries and manage Docker networks, volumes, and contexts. So it really can do a lot for you. And when you just open this locally, you can see these are containers that are currently running on my Mac. So when I open Docker Desktop, you can see all of the stuff that you see here is in line with what I'm deploying locally. But now comes the big secret here, because you cannot just use that to manage local environments. You can also use that in combination with the Remote Explorer to manage Docker containers on your remote servers just over SSH. This is so amazing. Let me quickly show you this and connect to one of my demo servers. So I'm just going to the Remote Explorer and opening an SSH connection to this remote machine. And now, because I have installed the Docker extension on my VS Code, I can now see that icon here as well. Click on that. And as you can see, I now can manage all the Docker containers on my remote server. This is so amazing. So the usual workflow that I'm following here is whenever I'm managing projects on my remote servers, I'm opening a remote SSH connection to my server. I go into the project directory. For example, let's just open the Traffic Demo 1 project here. And there I can manage the Docker Compose YAML file. But now, because I've installed the Docker extension, I can also do things like right click on that Docker Compose YAML file, run a compose up command or compose down, restart. For example, when I recognize, oh, the traffic project has a new Docker image with an updated version, I can easily just connect to my remote server, go in the project directory, change the number here, do a right click, run a compose down, run a compose up, and that's it. My container is now updated to the latest version. I can now just click on that. I can even open all the files inside the containers file system, which is great for migrating configuration files or migrating data files. You can easily just move them in and out of the container with VS Code. That's pretty cool. And of course, you can also do things like do a right click in here, view all the logs. So this will open a terminal window where you can troubleshoot certain things. Or you can inspect the manifest of your Docker container to get specific information about this. You can even use that to manage remote Docker resources, such as Docker networks, for example. Yeah, you can just click on that drop-down menu here, see all the different Docker networks that are currently existing on your remote server. You can even create new ones. Click on the plus icon, give it a name, select one of the three types, bridge, host, or Mac VLAN, and then you've got created a new Docker network on your remote host. That's so easy. You can even remove them here or inspect some of the details, and you can also manage Docker volumes with that. As you can see, I've got created a couple of Docker volumes to store persistent data of my containers for the Nginx proxy manager or for Ansible Semaphore, and also manage those type of resources. It's pretty useful. So there are so many cool things that you can just do in VS Code to manage containers on your remote server. Why the hell do I need any other tool where I first need to open a web browser, to log into a web UI, then fiddle around with the specific workflows of that tool to do those simple tasks that I can literally just do in 1 or 2 seconds when I'm using my code editor for doing anything. So that is the reason why I decided to mostly just use VS Code to manage my Docker containers. But wait, it gets even better, because VS Code also has some really great features for managing workloads in Kubernetes, especially for troubleshooting, but also quickly editing manifests, deploying manifests, and so on. I'm going to show that to you right now. The first extension that you're going to need for this is called Kubernetes. It's also kind of obvious. As you can see, it's not that hard to find those extensions. You just need to know that they are existing and how to use them. And this is also coming from Microsoft and enhancing VS Code with many, many capabilities and features around container orchestration workloads. Like you can manage Kubernetes clusters with it, do other DevOps tasks like troubleshooting and things, manage Azure, Minikube, AWS, or GCP clusters, and you can even manage some Helm repos with that. Once you install that, you get another icon in here, and when you open this, no, this is not meant to work in combination with remote SSH like Docker, because managing Kubernetes clusters, this is all done locally. You also need to install the kubectl tools and configure the Kubernetes context. I've explained this in a bit more detail in how to deploy a simple Kubernetes cluster using K3s in my K3s tutorial, so I will link you that in the description down below. Just use it to deploy a Kubernetes cluster somewhere. You can also use Docker Desktop to deploy a local Kubernetes cluster to play around with that and so on. And then use this extension to manage some container workloads on that. So first of all, you need to select a Kubernetes context. Yeah, just like I said, you need to configure that and then do a right click on this and set it as a current cluster. This is, by the way, also in line with what you have configured in your terminal. So when you're changing the Kubernetes context in your terminal with kubectl, then it's also switching that in VS Code. So this is kind of using kubectl in the backend. And you can even see and inspect some Helm repos that you have downloaded on your local workstation. So for example, you can go in here and see all the different Helm chart versions of traffic. You can even inspect the chart if you want to get some details about this, if you really need that. Or what I find extremely useful is fetch values. So then you get a template for all the default values in the Helm chart. So this is so useful if you want to customize your Helm deployments, and you don't need to search for that on Google somewhere. You just got it right in your code editor. That's really great. And of course, you can manage your Kubernetes clusters with it. So once you selected a current context, or you got that somehow enabled in your terminal, you can just click on that drop-down menu, and then you can open some specific resources in your Kubernetes cluster, such as namespaces. You can see all these different namespaces, and you can also switch to that namespace. Again, also in line with what you do in a terminal. For example, yeah, let's pick traffic again as an example. If you just click on that, it will open the manifest, and you can directly edit it in here if you need to. But you can also use that namespace to see more resources in that namespace. For example, if you want to see all the different pods in that namespace, you can just click on workloads, and then you can open the pods here, and then it will show you all the pods in the namespace that you have currently selected. You can also just click on that, and it will show you the manifest of that specific pod. Now you can also do other cool things, like click on that drop down menu, see the IP address and so on. You also got some small icons on the right side. This is how you can easily inspect all the logs. You just need to click on run, and then you can use this for troubleshooting and so on. You can even open a remote shell inside this pod here. So click on terminal, and this will again open a terminal, and we are now inside the containers file system. This is also great for troubleshooting and so forth. But of course, you can also do other things like inspecting the deployment, like the deployment for the traffic reverse proxy. This is what I've deployed on my Kubernetes cluster. Or do the same with stateful sets, daemon sets, jobs, and yeah, you also got other resources like network services. So this is for the load balancing part and so on. You can even see custom resources in here. For example, for Portainer, I've created a traffic ingress object in here, and you can find it in the custom resources here. Search for ingress routes. And yeah, I created an ingress route TCP for exposing this servers with trusted TLS certificates. And I even added a TLS pass-through for connecting my main Portainer instance to that agent. So you can do so many cool things and really use VSCode as a feature-rich container orchestration management platform. This is so amazing. What you can also do is you can inspect some of the Helm releases you have used to install. For example, I probably have installed traffic using a Helm chart. So once you switch to that namespace, you can see now the resources in that namespace get visible in here. And you can see that is one of the Helm charts that I've deployed with all of the details and the configuration stuff. So really amazing. And you can even do things like roll back to older deployments if you got something wrong in an update and so on. And this is even much more that you can do in Portainer, for example. Portainer doesn't have all these different features. So even a tool that is solely created for container management has sometimes not so many features as a VS Code extension. And again, it's all in a code editor. You can even deploy your Kubernetes manifests with that. You usually would follow a different workflow than creating Docker Compose templates and so on, but I will quickly show you what I mean, right? So for example, when I go into my HomeLab project, so this is where I'm storing most of my deployments in my HomeLab, such as Docker Compose file, but also Kubernetes manifests. For example, for Portainer, I've got this ingress route here, and I want to update this, right? So how do I do this? I can just easily edit this in VS Code and change certain things that I want to change, and then apply this with kubectl. So you would probably assume that the Kubernetes extension in VS Code would have something like when you make a right click that it suggests to apply those changes. But that's not happening here because you need another extension for that. And this extension is called Kubernetes Apply. So this is no official extension. It's a very small one that probably not so many people are using. But once you install that, it will offer you this ability to go to a manifest and do a right click to apply the resource. One thing that is a bit weird to make this work, you need to rename those files from YML to YAML, so that's a bit weird, but once you rename this and you're using the right extension, you can see there is a new menu point in here that's called KAS, Kubernetes Apply Resources. And when you click on this, you need to open a terminal first. I probably should also switch to the right context because this is what I've deployed on my production cluster, of course. So let's go in here, set the current cluster to production, and I also need to use the correct namespace, of course. So this is in the Portainer namespace. First of all, let me check if the resource is already existing. So this is a resource that is currently deployed on my cluster. So let's go back to my folder, to the manifest. Let's do right click and apply resource. You can see it just executes the kubectl apply command. And as you can see, yeah, that got updated now. And this is really so easy. Yeah? It's really a streamlined workflow to manage container platforms, to manage container resources on Docker, Kubernetes, even on remote servers where you're using Docker with just one single tool, which is VSCode. You don't need anything else. You don't need Portainer, you don't need Rancher. You probably just need some terminal tools and a code editor to make this all work. And for me, honestly, this is the simplest, fastest, and easiest workflow that I'm using to deploy resources in my HomeLab. Yeah, so if you want to try that out, just get VSCode. If you haven't already downloaded it, install the right extensions that I've shown you in this video and start managing your HomeLab resources and container workflows with a code editor. It's pretty cool. Again, I don't want to say that you need to quit using Portainer, Rancher, and all those other tools would be crap or something similar. No, those tools are still great, but I would definitely say that for everyone, there's the right tool, and you really need to find out, so what tool fits your workflow and what specific requirements do you have, which tool fits that better. And for me personally, it's just VS Code, because I can do literally 90% of all the work that I'm doing to deploy container workloads with this tool. So that's probably the best thing for me. But yeah, just tell me, what do you think? Are you surprised of all the capabilities of VS Code, or did you learn something new? Please leave me a comment. Many thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content for IT professionals and HomeLab enthusiasts. And if you enjoy all those free tutorials that I'm creating, why not consider joining our Patreon program? I recently added a couple of nice benefits to all the Patreon members, like early access, ad-free viewing on Patreon, an exclusive member chat on Discord. So join and let's have a chat about it. I love to hang out with you guys and talk about those tech topics. And thanks again for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.